What's up, guys? It is Dr. Seth, and we are back for another round of answering your questions from my Instagram AMA. Going to be making this a regular thing on Monday, so be on the lookout for when that question box drops over the weekend. And if you don't have Instagram or you missed the question box, drop your questions in the comments below because I am going to be pulling from there as well. And if we're going to start out today, might as well start out with a question that hits close to home for me because, for those of you who don't know, I ripped my pec off and had it reattached just under 6 months ago, and I am currently finding my way back from that. So, question number one, post-surgical rehab. Is it the same standards as post-injury rehab? Challenge the range in a tolerable way. So I'm going to start out by saying that in no way is this medical advice, because if you had a surgery, the biggest thing that you need to do is listen to your surgeon because that is what is going to keep you safe. But in general, if we're looking at the principles that we would apply to someone who was coming back from an injury that didn't require surgery, a lot of those same principles can apply to someone who is coming back from a surgical intervention. But the really big but is that if we're coming back from a surgery, we need to remember that our starting point and our rate of progress that we select is going to need to be in accordance to where we are following the surgery. Because the really big thing that we need to do if we're coming back from surgery is make sure that we don't go and rip the thing off that we just had sewn back on, because you're not going to be very happy. Your surgeon is probably not going to be very happy. I mean, he might be happy because he's going to get paid a second time, but we really do not want that to happen. So we need to make sure that we are proceeding with caution, and we need to make sure that we are not exceeding the capacity, both in our start point and in our rate of progression. And with my pec, what I started out with for my pec when I required surgery versus what I started out with when I've had previous partial tears in the past looked extremely different, because when I had a partial tear, I wasn't worried really about the rest of the stuff that was still intact. But when I had the thing sewn back on, I was very worried about not ripping the sucker out of my arm again. So what I started out with is I started out with just doing light isometrics, where I was flexing into internal rotation isometrically with my arm in the sling. I was pushing the external rotation isometrically with my arm still in the sling. I was doing little shoulder rolls trying to pull back and push through into my serratus. That is foreshadowing for a future question. And from there, I just slowly branched out, started doing more and more with the arm as it became available. And the big thing that I set out for myself, the big rule, is that I wasn't going to do anything that felt sketchy in any way, shape, or form. And if things did start to feel sketchy, I made sure that I shut it down, and I made sure that I slowed my progression so that I was not putting myself at risk. And 6 months later, I can say that I did a very good job of that, because I was able to press 405 on a floor press the other day with zero amount of sketch, period. And I know the rate of progression that I did, it did look very fast, but I did that because I knew that I was safe with the rate of progression I selected, because of how I felt and because I am in tune with my body. If you aren't someone who is confident with that, and you probably should not be, you should not do what I did, because the risk is going to be very high with how aggressively I did progress. But I was able to do it safely because I knew that I was in the pocket the entire way through. And even now, I'm still making sure that what I'm doing, I'm making sure that I'm not going anywhere sketchy, even though I'm at the point where it does feel strong. So yes, if we're coming back from a surgery, we do want to progress things in a tolerable way, but we need to be very aware of what is going to be tolerable, and we need to be more cautious, just because we don't want to rip that sucker out again. And as was foreshadowed, question two, or question two and three, because I had two that are pretty similar that I'm going to put together again. Question 2A, how to make my serratus anterior suck less. Question 2B, winged scapula, any exercise to get better. I'm going to start kind of with 2B because it'll lead into 2A. So if we have scapular winging, that basically is like our shoulder blade like flopping off of a rib cage and just not being glued down to the rib cage in the way that we want it to be able to produce force through the arm. And the muscle that is usually the culprit if we have scapular winging is going to be the serratus anterior. And barring neurological damage that is causing the serratus anterior just to be totally shut off, the biggest thing that we can do for it is to train that serratus anterior. And for question 2A, if we want to make the serratus anterior suck less, we want to train that sucker. And when we're looking at serratus anterior, its function is to anchor the scapula to the rib cage so that we can perform scapular motion with a relatively anchored scapula. Its action, though, is going to be to protract the scapula. It's this little sucker that runs under the armpit. It's going to push the scapula forward into protraction. So if we want to train it, we want to look at things where we can load protraction. And an easy way to do that is to do a scap-only push-up where our arms are locked, we're in a push-up position, we're pulling our shoulder blades back, we're going to make sure our shoulder blades are set down, and then we're going to push forward into protraction, trying to feel it kind of down low in front of the lat in the armpit type area. And if that isn't getting the job done, if you feel like you're struggling to connect to that, we can break it down even further and do a scap car, or a controlled articular rotation. And what we're going to do and what that's going to look like is we're going to shrug the shoulders up, we're going to pull the shoulders back, we're going to push the shoulders down while keeping them back, and then we're going to push the shoulders forward while keeping them down, and then we're just going to do circles like that, trying to create tension the entire way around. And if we want to load that, an easy way to load that and progress it is to put a band around our shoulder, pulling our shoulder back so that we can contract against that band as we're going through that circular motion, and that will help us get our serratus anterior working better. Now, if we want to do something that will translate better to lifting, we want to do things where we can add more load and we have more total shoulder motion. Two ways I like to do that is going to be with a full range push-up, meaning that we're going to be dropping down all the way to the bottom. We can elevate our hands for more stretch, and then we're going to push all the way through to the top and make sure we're getting protraction at the top end. As we're lowering, we're going to make sure that we're lowering it in a controlled manner and not just like flopping into the bottom and dumping away from the serratus. And then we're just going to push all the way to the top, catch that serratus as we lock out. The next way we can progress that is with a dip with a very similar intent. And the big thing with the dip is it's going to be a different angle, but we still want to make sure that we're trying to push our hands as far away from our body and try to get as high up as we can as we finish off that dip. So start out with some scap push-ups, start out with some scap cars, progress towards push-ups and dips with protraction, and your serratus anterior should start to work better. And if your serratus anterior starts to work better and do its job better, your scapular winging should no longer be a problem. And we're going to run a squatty theme for the next couple. So question 3, do beltless squats to practice bracing, both the skill and a weak core. Make sense. Now, if we're just looking at this on the surface, yes, in a way, it does make sense because a beltless squat is going to be more challenging on a brace and more challenging on our torso musculature than squatting with a belt will be. But, and again, another giant but, the skill of bracing with a belt and the skill of bracing without a belt are going to be very different. And if we want to train the torso musculature, yes, we're holding it solid in a brace without a belt on, but there are better ways to train the torso. And when we're thinking about the skill side of things, if we're bracing without a belt, we're going to be doing that by expanding down and then contracting against that expansion. We can also contract first, then expand. Either way, it doesn't matter. But the big thing is that all of the tension is going to come from active contraction, which in a way can be a good thing. But if I was to brace the exact same way without a belt as I do with a belt, I wouldn't be getting very much out of the belt, because the key to getting pounds out of your belt is to push out in the belt so that it can enhance our expansion tension, and then we can then contract against that enhanced expansion. So the big thing with a belt is that we need to push out into it so that we can use it to create more tension. And if we're missing that push out, which you are if you're squatting beltless because you don't have a belt to push out into, you're not going to get that skill transfer of pushing out into a belt. So if I have a lifter that's goals involve squatting in competition with a belt on, I want the vast majority of their heavy training to be with their belt so that they are rock solid when their belt is on. Now, can beltless training have some viability? Absolutely. It can be a good way to limit load. It can be a good way to make an off-season a little bit lighter. But aside from taking weight off the bar, there's not a whole lot of reason that I would train beltless or suggest someone train beltless, unless it's just something that's programmed light and I'm too lazy to put my belt on, because I have done that many a times. But I'm not doing it with the goal of making my belted brace better. I'm doing it out of laziness, which I should probably cut out, because being lazy isn't going to be good for the total. Now, when it comes to actually training the torso musculature, like I said, beltless training will be more challenging on it than training with a belt, because we don't have that belt to help us enhance tension. But if we're looking at training a muscle to be stronger, and yes, in a beltless squat, the goal is to hold the torso rigid, and that is partially a skill. But if we're looking from a pure strength perspective, if we're thinking about contracting a muscle isometrically versus lengthening and then contracting the muscle, lengthening and then contracting is going to be far more valuable for building strength than just holding it still. So in terms of increasing torso strength, I would way rather see lifters doing torso work outside of their squatting to bring up torso strength to then carry back to their brace skill to enhance their brace, rather than just training without a belt. And as far as things that can look like is any sort of weighted crunch, any sort of weighted sit-up for the flexion extension on the front side, any sort of spinal extension against weight for the flexion extension on the back side, any sort of rotation work to get that rotational component in. And in powerlifting, Everyone's so obsessed with the idea of like anti-rotation or anti-flexion. And again, if we want to get better at resisting rotation, the best way to do that is to train our ability to rotate because it's going to be the same muscles. We're just actively using them to produce more force. And if we want to resist the force, the best way to get better at resisting force is to get better at producing force. Same thing goes for flexion. So in general, I don't think beltless training is very, very productive if your goal is to be strong with a belt on. We can use beltless training to reduce loading on the bar, but I would rather see people do their heavy training with a belt on and then train their torso outside of their squat, bench, and deadlift. Squat theme question number 2, total question count number 4. Do you do any mobility work before squats? I'm 45 and need to do a lot to squat well. And when I'm warming up for squats, a lot of what I do, people might say looks like mobility work, but I'm not doing it with the intent of increasing flexibility. I'm doing it with the intent of being a bit of a diagnostic to tell me whether or not I have access to the positions that I need to squat before I start my actual squat training. And when I'm looking to increase flexibility, if I do identify something that is missing before I squat, yes, I will spend time on it in the gym, but my goal is to have all of my flexibility work happening outside of the gym so that I can carry it back into training and not need to waste time working on flexibility in training. And if the only place we're doing flexibility work is in our warm up prior to squatting and we're only squatting once or twice a week, we have the whole week where we're just getting stiff outside of squatting. So if you want to do flexibility work for squats, if you feel like you need to do flexibility work for squats, do some of the stuff that seems to be helping in your warm up more regularly away from training so that when it comes time to go to the gym, you have access to those positions. And because you didn't say like what flexibility is missing, a good recommendation for most lifters is to just do bodyweight squats at home, at work, just bust out, 10, 15, 20 reps a couple times a day, even once a day is going to go a long ways, because if the only time we're getting to a full depth squat is in the gym, and if we're only doing that once or twice a week, you have that whole week where you're getting stiff, you're adapting away from the pattern. So if we just access the position, access the pattern more frequently, we're going to be more ready to access it when it comes time to train. And if we're thinking about accessing position, question 5, how to increase my lower back strength and resilience in the arched position of a bench press. And similar to what I was talking about with squats, if the only time you're getting in that position is when you're benching, that's not a whole lot of access to the position. We're not giving ourselves a whole lot of opportunity to build tolerance to that position. And the position where we're arched on a bench, like no shit, we're not accessing it very often because how often do you have yourself all curled up, arched to the lumbar spine, hip extended, knee flexed? For most people, that's only going to be when they are bench pressing. And if we think about what that position is, we can replicate that position with a rear foot elevated split squat because in a rear foot elevated split squat, the knees bent, the hips extended, our lumbar spine is going to be in slight extension. And if we run a rear foot elevated split squat where we're really trying to drive through that back leg, push through the quad, push through the hip flexors as we go up to the top, that is going to be creating tension in the same position that we need to be strong on in order to create leg drive in a bench with a arched back. And you can run those as an accessory, you can run those at home, you can even spend time in a couch stretch if you just need positional access. And over time, if you do that enough, your bench will start to feel more and more comfortable. And last question of the day, I guess last real question because there's going to be bonus questions, but this is the last question that I'm going to go in depth on. If someone wanted to begin coaching, where would they start? And I think that for most people, the answer can be as simple as just starting. And no, I don't mean posting an Instagram story saying that you have 3 spots left and that they need to rush to apply now because those spots are going to get taken up. And what I mean by that is that you need to start helping people in your gym, start helping people in your training crew, start taking a leadership role in the crew, start trying to cue people, start trying to help people troubleshoot their lifts in a way that isn't just being some weirdo offering unsolicited advice to someone that doesn't want it. So it's going to be kind of a fine line to ride, but if you can start helping people in your gym, you can start figuring out problems that people have, people are going to see you figuring out problems. People are going to see you helping people. And when I started coaching, it wasn't intentional. It's something that kind of happened by accident because I was helping people in my crew. I was taking lifters in my crew to meets. I was handling them at meets. And after enough meets, after enough doing that, after helping enough people put pounds in their totals, people started asking like, hey, Seth, can you start coaching me? And I didn't want to do it at first. I didn't really want to be a coach, but after enough pestering, I finally said yes, and I took on my first official client. And from there, it kind of just snowballed. And like the big thing that lifters who have coaching aspirations need to do is that they need to get experience coaching people. And the best way to do that, other than working as a personal trainer in a commercial gym, because that way you'll get a lot of firsthand experience coaching people who have no idea what they're doing, and then coming back to powerlifters, it'll make powerlifters really freaking easy, is just getting experience coaching people and getting experience helping people and getting experience so that your coaching skills get honed, your communication skills get honed, and as your skills get honed, you're going to get better at it. And as you get better at it, people are going to start asking questions about coaching. And as people start asking questions about coaching, you're going to be able to start actually coaching people. And it isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It isn't something that most lifters will be good at right away because it is a skill and it does take time to develop. But if you take time to develop it, you are going to get better at it. And when you get better at it, more people are going to be interested in getting coaching from you. And to close things out, I had a bunch of questions come in about shoulder and elbow pain during squats. I covered that pretty in depth in a recent video, so be sure to go check that out. I'll link it here in the end credits. For everyone else who submitted a question, thank you so much. And if your question did not get answered, it is very likely that I've already covered it in depth in another AMA or in a previous whole video. So be sure to scroll through the channel. It's likely that you'll find your answers there. And thank you to everyone who stuck around this long. Appreciate the heck out of you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your night.